get started here. So I'm going to just go ahead and just hand out these little presentations. What I did is actually printed out the entire presentation as well, just so you guys could take some notes slide by slide. I found that it just makes it easier for you guys to kind of be able to follow along. And if there's something that you're not really sure about, you can write a question down and I could always jump back into it. The way I try to run these workshops is engaging as possible. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. I try to go into things a little bit deeper in detail. If it's something specific about your particular circumstance you're not really sure about, I could stick around a little bit later afterwards as well too and help answer some questions specifically to your circumstances. And there, okay. Before we begin, how many of you are looking at buying the home in the next 6 months? Okay, how many of you own the home already? Okay, excellent. Thank you. What are some of your biggest concerns when buying your first home? Do any of you guys have any concerns yet?
Affording it.
Yeah. Affording it? Okay. So the way that I designed this workshop, I'm going to sort of highlight some of the most important things you want to look out for before you buy a home, just to avoid major pitfalls. I started my company mainly because of my mother's experience. When she bought her first home, she didn't know any better. And the realtor and the bank pretty much took advantage of a first-time home buyer. And she was the ideal one. You know, it was a home that was on sale for $95,000, so on paper it looked like the payments were going to work. But what they didn't disclose is all the major problems that home had. And she didn't really understand the home inspection process and didn't really understand all the things that the home needed. But the home needed over $100,000 for work. So, you know, her first couple of years, the first thing she did was take out home equity lines in the home and invest that in remodeling projects, and literally everything was done wrong. You know, materials were the wrong materials, contractors stole money, the installation was done wrong, so it ended up becoming a nightmare situation. And consequently, by 2006, 2007, she was one of those homeowners that was going into the financial, she was in financial distress and went into foreclosure. And I was just getting into college, and I had 5 jobs just so that she wouldn't lose the house, and I bought the house from her so she wouldn't lose it on there. And since then, I've met with literally thousands of homeowners who have had similar experiences. I'm dealing with a homeowner right now who bought a home 5 years ago, and it was a foreclosure, and they were sort of pressured to buy the house and forego the home inspection process. Turns out that the whole back end of the home was completely rotted. You know, we just had another inspection yesterday, and we work with Habitat with Humanity as well. And they just had one of their contractors take a look at it, and they're like, yeah, this whole thing couldn't even be rebuilt. It has to be completely destroyed. You know, and if they would have known that before buying the house, it would have probably swayed their decision from buying that property. You know, so some of the things I'm going to be looking at today are the most common things you're going to be looking at on the exterior of a home. On there, because of the amount of time that we have, I won't have time to go over the entire home. But if you guys wanted to jump online and follow us on Instagram or whatever, we'll have some more videos on the rest of the home inspection process. So I have another presentation that I go over major systems and appliances, so like sub pumps, you know, how do the hot water heaters work and things like that, so that you may not be so familiar about on there. So I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Irving Espinoza. I'm the president and founder of Irving Consulting Group, and we have a residential division known as Homes by ICG, in which we specialize in residential project management. So our goal is to take the risk out of home improvement for first-time home buyers. So whenever you contact us, the main reason why a lot of homeowners will contact us is because they want transparency. They want to know whether or not they're getting a good deal on a product. They want to make sure they're using the right products. So we have affiliations and partnerships with certified installers and manufacturers to guarantee that you're going to have a great experience when you work with one of our certified partners on there. So to kind of dive into it on what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be talking about the home inspection process. We're going to talk about some smart energy saving tips. So these are some tips that you guys can apply in homes that you're currently living in now, or when you're looking at buying a new home, these are some things you want to look out for to make sure that the home's up to par when it comes to energy efficiency. We're going to be talking about roofing concerns, siding concerns, window concerns. Those are some of the biggest components on the exterior that a lot of people don't really pay attention to, but are very expensive projects. So I'll talk into what some of the warning signs you want to look out for those. I'm also going to talk about how to find a good contractor. You know, you don't have to use us, but we want to provide you the resources on how to find a good one if you need one on there. Then I'm also going to talk to you guys about what to expect when you are going through a remodeling project. If you have a family or friend in need, these are some tips that you can maybe give them as well. Okay. And then, of course, we'll talk about some helpful resources on how to determine what's a fair market price for a remodeling project. When do you know you're paying too much or too little for a project, right? So there's some helpful resources that I could guide you guys to. And then finally, I'll leave some time for some Q&A as well at the end of it so I can help answer some additional questions you may have. But again, as I said before, I try to run it as an open forum. So if there's a concept that I'm going over during this presentation you're not really familiar with, just let me know. I'll slow down a little bit and I'll kind of break it down for you in detail. And if it's something specific that you want me to go into your particular circumstances, I'll be happy to stay a little bit later afterwards to help answer some questions for you. Okay. So as far as the home inspection process here, the main thing that they're going to be looking for is major systems that, as far as like the foundation. What happens with a lot of foundations, particularly in the Northeast, is that a lot of water comes back into them. And there, so sometimes you see with older homes that the foundation is starting to crack, or sometimes the basement had moisture issues on there. So a really good home inspector is going to take the time to go through an entire inspection checklist that they'll have to kind of identify any warning signs that they may have around the foundation. Sometimes it's an issue related to like you not having any gutters around the home, so the water is just coming down the roof line, coming back into the front of the home and causing what's called trenching, and water pools in front of the home and then it works its way back into the basement on there. So those kind of things are sometimes very simple to address that you don't have to repair an entire foundation for. Sometimes just getting new gutters addresses that problem. So determining when a gutter is appropriate versus a new foundation, right? They're also going to look at the roofing system on there. They're going to look at the attic space to make sure that there's good ventilation and also good insulation on there, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. They'll look at water management. So water management, what I refer by that is mainly gutters around the home. And then we're also going to talk about like paint, right? Paint in New England is a really big issue because if you're living in an older home, chances are it hasn't been painted regularly. So you want to paint a home every 5 to 7 years. Now, that's a lot of maintenance. So that's why a lot of people switch to vinyl siding because they don't want to have to keep painting. Because painting every 5 to 7 years is, 7-10 grand depending on the size of the home. And there, whereas siding is 15 grand and you're done for 50 years. So depending on the type of home you decide to move into, that's something you're going to want to take into consideration on there. Electrical systems. I worked with a homeowner this past summer who had a home inspector come out, and unfortunately there was a little bit of a language barrier. There was a Hispanic family and the home inspector was American, and they were trying to communicate that there was issues with the electrical systems, and it was a multi-family home. And so they got really excited and emotionally attached to this particular home in Worcester, and they paid, the asking price was $340,000. But because they wanted the home so much, they paid over asking price. They ended up paying over $375,000 for the home. And then they realized that when it comes time to remodel the kitchen and the bathroom, all the electrical was damaged. So you have to replace the electrical, and guess what? In addition to that, because not just one thing when you buy a home, the plumbing was also done illegally. They never did the plumbing properly. So in order for them to install a new kitchen, they had to fix all the electrical, all the panels, and all the plumbing. You're now talking an additional $15,000, $20,000 just to do that alone. Never mind the kitchen remodel on there. And they're already over budget with the initial investment on the house. So you don't want to end up in that situation. You want to make sure that you know what you're looking at and you have a home inspector that you can trust. And that's why language and communication is so important. Right now, the construction industry, I was running a report with one of my best friends yesterday. Better Business Bureau just came out with a new report for 2018. And the construction industry in 2016 had a 68% complaint rate. And in 2018, it actually went down. It went down to 67%. So it's not that much better, right? So you as a homeowner, in order for you to protect yourself against unscrupulous contractors and issues with communication, you have to inform yourselves. So the fact that you guys are here today, like, you guys should congratulate yourselves because you guys are taking initiative. Most homeowners don't do that, and that's why most of them have a bad experience. Most homeowners have no guarantees when they do home remodeling projects, and that's scary because down the road there's usually an issue that comes up, and if you don't have a guarantee, you're completely on your own. Even the building inspectors sometimes can't even do anything about it. I'm helping a family friend who recently had that happen to her. So it's very important that you understand what the major systems that are going on in the home and you have a clear explanation of what's happening with it, because that could cost you literally tens of thousands of dollars, and it can happen very quickly. And it usually does. Usually when you're first moving in your home, you want to make it homely. And so, if that's even a word, and you try to make arrangements. Maybe you want to have like your man cave downstairs, or maybe you want to have a new kitchen, right? And you don't realize that you have still knob and tube wiring in the home. Well, if you're going to put new recessed lighting in the house, you got to redo the wiring. Did you know that? That's going to cost an additional 5 to 10, 15 grand in addition to the kitchen remodel. Now you're way over your budget and you didn't anticipate that, and you already started the project, right? So these are the sort of things that we want to sort of condition you. And the way I'm going to kind of do it is I'm going to create worst case scenario, right? Reason why I'm kind of creating worst case scenario because it's memorable. It's not the case that you're going to experience. In most cases, you won't experience this at all because you guys are going to be well informed. But I just find that when I talk about best case scenario and show really pretty pictures, people don't really remember, right? So I just want to kind of have you look at these things in a little bit of a different perspective on there. So the reason why the home inspection process is really important is because they're going to help you limit your risk when buying a home on there. So I do recommend that you do get a home inspection for the home that you're intentionally ready to buy. I've had homeowners get a home inspection on every single house they were looking at. Don't do that. It gets incredibly expensive incredibly fast. And it's not the best use of their time or your time if you're not seriously considering buying that home. So do your research and figure out whether or not that's the right home for you and you're ready to put an offer. Once you're ready to put an offer, have an inspection done before putting in an offer. Because between your realtor and your home inspector, they'll help you determine whether or not that roofing needs to be replaced or that siding should be replaced or maybe that foundation needs to be addressed. And you could leverage that in your negotiation when buying the new home on there, okay? So the next thing here is going to be the pest inspection process. This isn't quite as common. We don't typically see a lot of homeowners doing that before they buy the home, but in some cases it's important. So like if you've had a home that's been in foreclosure for 3 to 4 years and it's been vacant for a while, may not be a bad idea to have someone do a pest inspection process on there just to make sure that there's no rats in the walls. Because what happens with rats is that they eat the wires behind the walls. And so it causes electrical problems when they're looking for insulation. We had that happen recently with a client. They thought that there was electrical problems in the house. Turns out that there was because the mouse ate the wire, And so it's shorting all the electrical systems in the house on there. And then of course, termites, insects, and things like that, you want to look out for those things too, especially if there's a lot of moisture around the home. So if you're seeing a lot of rot and possibly termites on there, good idea to have a pest inspection done on the home. So this is a picture of a really good client of ours in Worcester that we did some work on last summer. And you guys can see over here on the far left, what do you guys notice in that window on the far left here? It's like foggy, right? Do anyone of you know the name for that one that happens in a window? Condensation. There's a technical name for it though. It starts with an S. You got it though. Seal failure. You're going to see this at some point in your lives. Seal failure, okay? Whenever you see this, don't ignore it. It's a really big issue, and I'm going to show you now why. Okay. Now, I like dramatic effects, so I hope you don't mind. Oops. Sometimes I like dramatic effects. Is it working? No. I have a video on here, so. You don't? Oh, there's so many of them. Let's see if this works now. It's going to load, I think. Shoot. Well, while it figures it out, basically what had happened is that termites actually got in that wall because of that moisture and actually ate up that entire wall and rotted out the entire wall there. And consequently, in order for you to fix that problem, you have to repair that entire wall. And we had to knock out that entire wall, unfortunately, which led to a significant amount of investment in order to do that on there. I wish it was working right now. It's still loading, but I'm not going to hold you guys up. You guys can watch this online if you guys want. But the reason why this is important is because we thought that initially it was just going to be as simple as just replacing the glass. And very often that's usually the mindset. But the problem with seal failure is that the condensation is water, right? And that water continues to run down that wall. And when you run it to the bottom of that window, what's below that window is just wood. And so it ends up rotting everything below it. And unfortunately, that's what ended up happening there. And that attracted the bugs, that attracted the termites on there. So if you ever see seal failure, you typically will see it a lot on the north side of the home where you're not getting as much sunlight. Or around the bathroom, or around a room that has a lot of moisture or a lot of humidity in there. So don't ignore it if you're seeing it, because it will typically cause, over time, moisture issues, rot, and possibly mold and mildew, okay? So this map right here that I'm showing you here is a map of the United States for the United States Energy Code on there, and each sector there where you see 1 through 7, those are the different codes that are going to be very important for building codes. So in Florida, Georgia, and Texas, it's very important that you're conscious of heat, whereas here in the Northeast, we're going to be very conscious of extreme heat and cold, so the constant variation in temperature. And so this tells us exactly how much insulation we should have based on the environment that we live in. So where we live in, we fall under code 6, code 7 on there. So what's recommended for us is that we have an R38 to an R60 worth of insulation. Basically what that means is that you're going to want to have roughly about 13 to 20 inches of insulation in the attic space, okay? Or roughly about 5 to 6 inches of insulation in the wall cavity, okay? And the reason why that's important is to limit the amount of energy loss in the homes, okay? So what I'm going to be going over, and you're going to see these slides a lot, is because when we're looking at energy loss and the way that energy flows through the home, energy always rises or heat always rises in the home on there. So in the basement on here, what tends to happen in the basement is that the basement is much cooler in the winter and summer months on there. And as a consequence of that, it also has a tendency to retain a little bit more moisture in those areas as well too. So you end up with a lot of humidity issues on there. So you want to be conscious of that. Sometimes you might need a dehumidifier in the basement on there. However, going into the first floor, second floor on there, you're going to have a lot of energy loss in your walls, in your windows, and in your doors. For most homes, the most significant amount of energy loss that you're going to experience is going to be around the exterior walls, which is going to account for about 35% of the actual energy loss in the home. So your siding, okay? For a roofing system, you're going to account for about 25% of the energy loss, and of course for windows and doors, roughly about another 25% of the energy loss in the home on there. Now that does vary based on the style of home that you have. So some townhomes that are attached together, you may not have as much energy loss on the sides of the home. Where you're going to have the most amount of energy loss is going to be around windows and around the attic space on there. So when dealing with insulation, if you're considering buying a home that was built in the 1980s or prior, building codes were a little bit different then. They didn't require as much insulation as they do today. So you're going to want to have your building inspector take pictures of this and try to figure out whether or not your insulation is exposed, like it is here. Okay? If you're seeing like this where your ceiling joists are exposed here, that's an indication your insulation is still a little low. Okay? That's roughly about 6 to 8 inches of insulation to attic space, and you'd want to have blown-in insulation added to that. So you would want to bring that up to about 12 to 14 inches of insulation for the average attic size. And then if you have a larger attic space, you're going to want to have closer to about 20 inches of insulation on there. Main reason for that is to prevent energy loss in the home. Okay? It's important for 2 reasons. In the summertime, it helps prevent something where you have radiant energy, where the sun's beating down on the home, and it helps prevent that excess heat passing through the actual attic and into the main floor. So if you currently live in a home that has a 2nd story, you might sometimes notice that when you're going upstairs, it gets a lot warmer in the summertime. And there, have any of you ever felt that before? On there, that's called the stack effect. What causes that is that your insulation can no longer handle the excess heat. So as a result of that, your insulation is no longer effective, and it starts to push through the ceilings and into the 2nd floor, causing a significant amount of energy loss on there. Consequently, the way you notice that in the wintertime is a lot of ice damming. Okay? So if you're driving by a home down the street in the next couple of days when it snows again, you're going to start to see a lot of ice damming forming. That's an indication that there's not enough insulation or not enough ventilation on there. So the home will warn you about those things, and they'll give you physical indicators. And I'll show you in the roofing how you could identify those things on the outside also, without even looking at the attic on there. So insulation is one of the smartest investments you can make here into your home. Like programs like Mass Save, for instance, right now are offering programs up to 75% off. So you could insulate your entire home for as little as $1,500 for many homes. And it's one of the most energy efficient things you could possibly do. Some window companies will go out and claim that you're going to cut your energy bills by as much as 50%, but you're going to invest $20,000 to do that. You could do something comparable with insulation. Okay? And then, of course, this type of insulation right here is going to be closed cell insulation and open cell insulation. There's 2 types. And that's if you're considering finishing your basement or finishing your attic. It just depends on which one you're trying to do. So in this particular case here, this is in a basement on here, so you're going to be using a closed cell. Simply what that means is that moisture can't pass through it. Okay? Whereas in an attic space, you want it to breathe. Okay? You don't want to have that moisture retained in there, so you want to get that moisture out of there. So you're going to want to use an open cell in the attic space in many cases on there. Okay? And that's if you're looking to do a finished attic. And then, of course, what you'll hear a lot of as well is weatherizing the home. So when you guys first become first-time home buyers on there, you guys go and buy your first home, you're going to get a lot of ads from like Home Save or something like that, or Mass Save, for instance, in which they're going to try to offer you weatherizing. All that really means is that all the exterior openings in the home, they're going to seal off to prevent air leakage in the walls on there, and that helps maximize the energy efficiency in the walls, especially with older homes. With some of the newer homes, one of the problems with a lot of newer homes is that they're too tight, so they don't breathe enough. So I'll show you what to do with those homes in a moment. on there. Any questions so far? Okay. So when dealing with ventilation, this is how we know whether or not a home's working properly. And this is one of the issues that I have with some home inspectors, is that some home inspectors, when they look in the attic, they just look up to see what's going on with the insulation, but don't necessarily look at see what's going on with the ventilation. And so what happens with ventilation sometimes is that when the insulation was blown in, they blew it in too far, and it actually ends up blocking all the vents, okay? And consequently, what that ends up happening is that it actually ends up causing a major blockage, causing ice damming to form on there because the home can no longer breathe. And inevitably, what ends up happening is that a lot of moisture will be retained in the home over the winter months, causing frost to build up inside the attic space. And so, as you can imagine, if you have frost building up in the attic space, what do you think is happening with your insulation, right? Your insulation is probably moist, wet, and moist too. And as consequently, your insulation is no longer working effectively, which is why people's energy costs skyrocket. But how many people visit their attics in the winter? Not many people, right? So they don't realize that. They just assume that because it's really cold, that's why their energy costs are so high. When in reality, the initial cause of the problem that triggered it was that there was too much moisture because of the lack of ventilation. So the two things that could really help improve your home's energy efficiency are having blown-in insulation and having sufficient intake and exhaust ventilation. Those are two of the smartest things you could do to your home. And they're also relatively inexpensive. Adding more ventilation to your home will typically cost also about $1,500 to $2,000 on average on there. Now, the way that you can recognize ice damming is looking for hot spots on a roofing system. So things like this here. So if you're noticing that, that just means that the energy is not flowing, or the heat is not flowing evenly throughout the roofing system. So consequently, what starts to happen is that the snow is melting faster here because that's where the concentration of heat is going, because heat rises, right? So it starts to melt here, and then the water drips underneath the snow, and then eventually, as it gets close to the end here, where it's no longer getting any warm air, it actually starts to freeze. And that's where you get your ice dam, where it forms right here. And that's where you have water that backs up underneath the shingles, works its way back into the attic space, works its way back into the walls, and eventually ends up rotting out your walls on there. So I'll show you some pictures of what that would look like if it goes on for too long on there. Radiant barriers are other things that you could do to maximize the home's energy efficiency. And if you see a home that has a radiant barrier that's a new home, that's a really good indicator. Okay, they're trying to make that home as green as possible, and it's actually proven that green homes typically sell faster and they're worth more on there. So whenever you see a home that has this going on in it, it's going to be a really comfortable home for the most part. And there, what it's designed to do is it's designed to reflect up to 99% of radiant heat away from the roofing system. And there, so when the sun's pounding on it year round, helps reflect that excess heat away from the roofing system, and it helps drop that attic temperature on average between 30 to 50 degrees. So it makes a significant difference in the overall comfort of the home on there. Also significantly lowers your energy bills too, and it works year round. In the wintertime, it reverses, so it still helps reflect radiant energy away from the roofing system, but in the winter, what it allows it to do is it allows the snow to melt evenly on the roofing system on there. So it helps prevent the risk of ice damming forming on a roof because the temperature across the entire roof plane is staying consistent on there. So rule of thumb is that your attic should be comparable to the ambient temperature of the outside. So if outside is like 35 degrees, 40 degrees, your attic should also be roughly 35, 40 degrees. If you're finding that your attic is like 55, 60 degrees, you're literally paying to heat your attic. So that's an indicator that you don't have enough ventilation and not enough insulation. So you could have a test done on that to make sure that it's working properly in there. And then of course solar. So many homeowners that are considering buying new homes are also inheriting the existing solar system. You need to find out whether or not there's a loan still on that solar and what's going to happen with it. Is it being paid off when you're buying the home? Or is it being transferred over to you? Because the transfer of ownership for solar has to happen within 90 days of you moving into the home on there. So if you don't want the solar and you don't want to inherit the solar, you need to figure that out before you buy that home on there. Generally, there's a 20-year contract that comes with the solar system on there, so it's usually not something that's going to be removed unless there's someone that's buying it out on there. So that might happen at the time of the sale, but it usually doesn't on there. So it's very important that you figure out what's going to happen with the ownership of the solar program. The other thing you have to take into consideration also is the fact that how was the usage for the solar? If it was for originally just 2 people living in the home and now you're bringing in a whole family, it's not going to be the same usage anymore right? You're going to use a lot more energy with a whole family. So can you add on to the existing solar system to compromise and make up for the excess energy that you're going to be using in the home to make sure it's more energy efficient on there too?
Ask a quick question.
Sure.
The solar system, so you don't actually own the panels, you're
Leasing.
leasing them from?
Yeah, and so not always. So in most cases, there is a lease on there, but a lot of companies do sell the solar also. So you got to determine whether or not there's an existing contract, and if there is, who owns that contract, and what's the liability on that contract. That should be disclosed to you. A lot of times they don't figure that out until after the paperwork, and then you realize, oh, there's an additional $20,000 on top of this too.
Yeah.
You know,
if you don't want the panels, they come in, they remove them.
Again, you got to figure out what's going on with the note on that. If there's money still owed on it, that has to be paid off on there. Something has to happen because there's money still owed on it. So if the original owner no longer, wants it anymore, and their plan was to sell it to the new homeowner, you got to figure that out with them on there. Okay. But solar is really great because it's something that you can hold on to for a very, very long time, and it will eventually pay itself off. For most homes, it usually pays itself off within the first 7 to 10 years for most homes on there. But you just got to figure out whether it's a lease, if it's an ownership, and if there's any warranties with it, or if the company's even still in business. A lot of them are not in business anymore. So you got to figure out if there's a maintenance guarantee or a warranty that comes along with it on there. And then, of course, the next one here is looking at the overall roofing system and the exterior of the roofing. What are some of the concerns you want to look out for to determine whether or not it should be replaced before you buy the home, right? So again, take into consideration the climate. There's a reason why I keep sharing this with you. It's almost like subliminal messages. It's because of the fact that I want you guys to realize that most contractors in the country mean well, but they're not trained on United States energy codes. They're trained on building codes, but not necessarily energy codes. So consequently what happens is that they tend to sell you products that are good, better, best, but the good and the better are nationwide products. So that means if you live in like Florida, Georgia, or Texas, where it's a lot warmer, that good system would be really good there. However, here in the Northeast, where we deal with extreme weather out here, you think about the summer months here where we have 85, 90 degrees here, and then in the winter, you have sometimes below zero. You're talking deviation in temperature of almost 100 degrees. There's very few places on earth that deal with that. And I used to talk about this a lot with the last company I used to work with because it's something that came up quite often. And so you got to be mindful of the fact that the materials that you're using, if they're not appropriate for this environment, they're going to fail prematurely. Most materials fail prematurely because most people believe that, oh, well, it says 50-year warranty on the box. It's 50-year material warranty in its appropriate environment. And that's why most materials are voided on day one. And one of the clauses in their warranties is acts of God. Well, is environment an act of God? Right? So you got to take that into consideration because of the fact that I have so many homeowners right now. This is what I specialize in roofing, siding, and windows. I've educated over 5,000 homeowners on this. And most of the homeowners that we're dealing with that have leaks right now are on roofing systems that are less than 10 years old because they were sold basic roofing systems on there. And if they would have invested $1,500 more to get the right one for this environment, they wouldn't be in that situation on there. So just do your research on this. So I'm going to show you some of the things to look out for. So things like algae, moss, lichen like we see over here. If you ever see this going on a roofing system, do not ignore it. That is an indicator that your shingles are no longer repelling water. Shingles are not waterproof, okay? They are water repellent. So the moment that those little rocks or those little granules wear out on those shingles, you no longer really have any water protection on that. So what happens is that whenever it's raining, snowing, or you just have frost sitting on the roofing system, it's absorbing through those shingles, and then the only barrier of protection that you have left is what's underneath the shingles, which we call underlayments. Sometimes it's ice and water shield, sometimes it's a synthetic underlayment, but more often than not, if it's an older system, it's just paper. It's called felt paper or construction paper. And the problem with that stuff is that once it's exposed to moisture and it's saturated with moisture, it's no longer waterproof. So what starts to happen is actually causes tremendous wood rot. So a lot of homeowners, when they have this much algae and moss on a roofing system, the wood decking's rotted, okay? And you just don't want to let it get to that point. Now, when you do see algae and moss, does it always mean that the wood's going to be rotted? No, right? But it's important that you go and inspect the attic space if you're seeing it during a home inspection to figure out what's going on, because a lot of times it's not just a matter of just replacing a roof anymore. Sometimes it could become structural issues on there. Things like this here. This is a newer roofing system. Why is this newer roofing system having these problems? This is a roofing system that a homeowner called us to, and they were wondering why they were getting so much ice damming on a new roof. Why are you having problems with a new roof? The reason why that was happening, no ventilation. There's no ventilation. So that could have easily been addressed by adding more ventilation, and that's what happened. We had to add more ventilation, and it resolved the problem. There wasn't enough intake and exhaust ventilation going in, so constantly the moisture was being retained inside the home, causing the insulation to get damp, and it was also causing higher energy costs, and consequently, it was also causing leaks inside the home as well because of the ice damming on there. This was a really interesting story, we had an elderly lady call us, and she had a contractor, pretty much tell her that she needed to get a whole entire new roof because it was leaking, and it was going to cost her $13,000 to replace the roof. And we had to figure out what was going on, what was the cause of the problem. Turns out that the cause of the problem was the seal on the pipe, because what happens with these is that when they get really, really hot, really, really cold, really hot, really cold, they tend to expand and contract, so the rubber seal actually cracked on it, on there. So if you're not an informed consumer, you're spending $13,000 on that new roof because you're afraid that it's leaking, when it's actually something as simple as replacing this, which is $300 to replace. Do your research and know what you're doing, because otherwise you're going to be taken advantage of by someone. Another one down here is a chimney. Is that chimneys have a tendency to fail over time, and so a quick fix, especially when it's like raining or snowing a lot, is that some companies will go up there and put tar around the chimney, okay? And the problem with tar is that it's fine for a quick fix for a couple months, but it's not intended to be a long-term solution. So consequently, what ends up happening is that the tar over time, similar to that rubber seal, it expands and contracts, eventually cracks, and it actually ended up leading to a leak inside the home, which we could see caused significant damage inside the home, okay? And there as well. That's, again, something as simple as reflashing the entire chimney instead of opposed to replacing the whole entire thing, okay? And then, of course, we talk about this every class. This is a brand new roofing system that was done 6 months prior. The homeowner was having leaks and tried calling the company several times, and they were nowhere to be found. Turns out they were a storm chaser. Do you guys know what storm chasers are? Okay. So do any of you remember that we had a hailstorm like 2 years ago? Any of you remember that? So whenever there's like a major natural disaster, there's companies that literally specialize in traveling across the country to go to storm areas. And what they do is they work with insurance companies to submit claims to do roofing projects. However, most of them don't do good work. They do very shoddy work, and they go in there and do it super cheap. In this particular case, they offered the client to do it for a ridiculously cheap price. She thought it was a really good deal. And I don't know if you've caught on, there's a lot of women that have had these bad experiences. So she had a really bad experience, and they never did anything right when they did the roofing system. So instead of doing proper step flashing, and step flashing is when you put, the right way to do a wall is to rip up the siding, put a water barrier behind the wall, and then you have metal that goes all the way up the wall that we call step flashing, okay? And then from there, you need to make sure that you put down the new shingles over that appropriately. They never did that. Instead of doing all of that, because they never wanted to open up the wall, because the fastest way to do it, they did silicone seal. They just did silicone, and they just sealed it all the way up the wall. The problem with silicone is that when it's exposed to heat and exposed to cold, it cracks. And it pulled away, ended up leaking behind the wall. The wall ended up leaking, got into the attic space, and eventually worked its way back into the home. The homeowner called us because they had a leak in the ceiling, not because of the leak in the roof. She was like, there's no way there's a leak in my roof. It's a brand new roof. That's what you're going to think. There's nothing wrong with my roof. And then it turns out that there's a huge problem with the roofing system. And in order to find, and it wasn't just here, there was a lot of other problems that were done wrong. And that's why it's important that you know what you're looking at, and that you have, when you work with a company, that they explain to you step by step what it is that they're going to do differently than other companies to make sure you have a great experience on there. Another example is going to be storm damage. We briefly talked about storm scenarios, but here's a really fun one here. When shingles blow off like this, many times they're blowing off like this because of nailing patterns or nailing installation. So building code requires that you have 4 nails per full shingle. We do a minimum of 6. just because of the fact that we are in an environment where we could potentially get high winds above 90 miles an hour on there. But right here, you could actually see in some of these that their actual nails were actually above the nailing line with a lot of these. And I know that it's hard to see from that back there, so I apologize, and I think the pictures you have in there are black and white. But I can make this available as a PDF and send it to you too if you'd like to, and you could just shoot me an email, I can send it to you. But in this particular case here, when you have a really, really high wind storm, it's going to grab whatever's loose, and it's going to rip it up. And the moment that it rips it up, it's like a domino effect, and everything comes along with it. And that's why with projects like these, if they're not done well, it's going to be evident the moment there's a major disaster on there. Unfortunately, problems like this, like God forbid you ever have to deal with something like that. But unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do in a scenario like that. But what the last thing you want to do is, hire just some random company who's going to do it for half the prices of everybody else, just because of the fact that it's going to cost a lot of money to fix it, and you want to have a little bit of money left over to be able to work on something else. You need to make sure that the exterior components of the home and the interior components of your home are done by certified experts, and that they walk you through each step of the way. Sometimes it's going to cost you a little bit more, but don't cut corners on there, because it will come back and haunt you down the road on there. Tree damage on there. When you're dealing with tree damage on there, you need to obviously get your insurance company involved immediately on there, and then of course seal it as well. So in the wintertime, I mentioned this because I believe it was 2014, 2015, we had that ice storm on there, and we had a lot of power outages. So there's a probability that this could happen again over this winter on there. And so if this does happen, one of the first things you want to do is have a tree company come out there. And if it's on an electrical line, your usually like National Grid will send someone out there to address it right away on there. But you need to get that out of the house immediately, because what's going to happen is that water is going to get into your attic space. So don't leave that sitting there. Also, you want to look for homes that if they've ever had structural damage to the home. Unfortunately, homes are not like cars where they have a Carfax. So you need to find out from the previous homeowner if there was a lot of overhanging trees, if there was existing damage to the home on there. Okay? Especially if you see that some trees were cut. It's usually pretty evident if you could see homes where there's trees in the backyards that were cut, that were overhanging. You want to find out why those trees were cut. Maybe they cut them because they wanted to add solar, maybe they cut it because it fell. So you just want to try to figure that out to see if there's structural damage in the home.
Do they have to tell you?
They don't have to tell you anything. Don't ask, don't tell, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have to tell you. You could also.
You should ask it.
Yeah, they're just things that, like, if they stand out, maybe inquire about it, and that's sort of the point. I told you I was going to show you guys sort of worst case scenario on here, and this is one of those cases. Very rarely does it happen, but we have seen homeowners, like one of the first clients I helped at the beginning of this year was a gentleman by the name of Paul in Framingham, and he had that happen. He had a tree branch that fell over his pool and just nicked his roof just in the right spot to cause a hole in his roof, right? And no one knew, but I picked up on it because of the fact that I could tell that the shingles didn't match, And so those are sometimes you just got to pay attention to that. Are the shingles in that area different colors? Why are they different colors? They probably had to repair a leak, So just kind of look for those things. Hail damage is going to be one of those things too that you also want to look out for as well. And there, so if there was an insurance claim on the home, you want to try to find that out too. And then of course, things like this here. This happens from the shingles staying there for too long. So if that's been on there for if you see a shingle or a house that has that going on, that should be replaced before buying the home. Now here's the thing. I don't like it when homeowners do it themselves. I would rather have the new homeowner do it. If you guys had to guess why would you guess? What would you guess of why it's better if you do it versus them? I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
Not going to hire people who do as good a job.
They're not going to hire people and why is that? Cheap? 100%. The homeowner wants to maximize their profit, right? They don't want to do it. And if they're doing it, it's because of the fact that they don't want to lose the deal, right? So they're going to do it, but they're going to find someone who's going to do it cheaper just to sell the home, just to make you happy enough to buy the home. Don't do that. I'd rather have a credit taken off the total price of the house and you find someone better to do it because of the fact that you could control the quality of workmanship that's going to be done on it. Because really good contractors will give you a lifetime guarantee. Otherwise, if you get it done for 5, 10, 15 grand, there's not going to be a guarantee that comes with it in many cases. So that's why I always recommend that if you do see something like this going on, that you just negotiate it off the total asking price rather than have them replace it before. I hear it all the time that they say, oh, well, I'm not going to take $10,000 off the house. I'll just do it myself. And then they have someone down the street do it for $5,000, and they just save themselves $5,000. You know, and then all of a sudden you, the new homeowner, have problems 3-4 years down the road. Well, guess what? It's no longer their problem, right? So that's why you want to look out for it. And I deal with this very often. And then this problem right here is how you notice ice damming problems in the winter, in the summertime. Curling shingles. This is how you identify whether or not that home is going to have ventilation problems in the wintertime. Is that your shingles will start to curl up if they're getting way too hot for way too long. So that's an indication that your attic is staying way too hot. Okay, so if you ever see this happening on a roofing system on there, that's a telltale sign. It doesn't necessarily mean that the roof needs to be replaced. It just means that there's some kind of heat or moisture problem going on in that home that should be resolved on there when you first move into that house. Okay, and then of course gutter systems. Gutter systems are really important because of the fact that it's one of the, beyond the roof, it's the second protection against water on there. And gutters are designed to help protect the home from having too much water coming back into the foundations on there. Because if there's too much water coming back into the foundation, that'll cause the foundation to crack over time on there, and that'll lead to leaks down the road too. And it could also lead to the foundation failing as well and cracking or potentially sinking on there. So this picture right here, the reason why, and I wish I took the picture from further away, but there was actually a tree over here. The problem with this corner here is that there's already a wall right here, so the last thing you want to do is put more water where there's a wall, because it actually blocks it and actually tends to pool there. Okay? It actually would have been better if the gutter actually ran this way. Okay? You want the water to run away from the house and not concentrate back towards the house. There, and that's why that was not the best place to put it there. Okay, and then of course the seams on gutters, these are very, very simple to fix. You don't need to replace all your gutters. Sometimes they don't look very pretty, but they work. So this is something as simple as just putting silicone seal inside of them on there and sealing all the gaps inside the gutters to make sure you have good water management. Okay, and then of course chimneys on here. These are really big things that a lot of homeowners don't realize that need to be taken care of when they first move into a home. And so chimneys are, again, not waterproof. Brick is porous, so when it's exposed to too much water, it'll actually absorb through the actual brick itself and cause a leak inside the home. And there, it could also crack and break. And I've been around homes where literally the bricks were laying on top of the roof on the edge. If you had a very strong wind, could have also blown over and hit someone, which is a liability to the homeowner. So you don't want to let that happen. So the right way to handle a chimney is to make sure that it's repointed if that's happened. And that's something that you could, again, a good home inspector should be able to point out to you. So you could basically make a mental note of all the things that you don't like wrong with the house. And you, at the offer, when you're submitting your offer, you make sure that you account for these things in your offer. So something like that would probably cost you $2,400 to repair. So again, $2,400 off. You have your roof, that's another $10,000. Now you have $12,400. And then you just make a mental checklist so that when you put your final offer in, you have a reason why you want that off on there. And then, of course, the algae and the moss. So I was saying this earlier that in many cases, when you see algae and moss going on a roofing system, some people get scared. They're like, oh my God, I need to replace my entire roofing system. That's not the case. Sometimes it's just a matter of just cleaning it. So what do some people do when they're getting ready to sell the home and they want to make it look as pretty as possible? They power wash the roof. Never power wash a roof. All that pressure on a roofing system will actually destroy and remove any granules that are on the roof that are there to protect the roofing system. So although the roofing system is going to look really beautiful and it's going to look nice and clean, you've actually eliminated any protection that may have had, and now it's going to fail twice as fast on there. In addition to that too, how do you notice whether or not there's a roof that was power washed? If you see a roof that's almost like squeaky clean and you see streaking on the roofing system, it's power washed on there. So if you're looking at submitting an offer to a home and you see that, ask them if they power wash it or cleaned the roof recently. And then ask them, follow that up by how old is the roofing system. If you know that it's over 15 years old, it's going to probably need to be replaced in the next 5 to 8 years on there. So again, have that as a mental note of something that you're probably going to want to negotiate into the contract on there. So if you do see algae and moss though, these are things that can be resolved very easily in many cases. So if it's not so bad, if you're seeing things like this going on, sometimes by using a simple organic solution and just spraying it on the roofing system. Someone was telling me about vinegar and like baking soda and water, mixing those will help kill the algae in the moss. What we use is what's called copper cat. So it's just a copper strip that's installed at the ridge of the roofing system that's installed once and it's there for life. And essentially what it does is that as the water hits copper, it ionizes the water. So essentially what that means is that it makes it poisonous to any algae, mold, fungus, or lichen. So if you ever go to hospitals, hospital doors are actually infused with copper in many cases, or zinc, to prevent viruses from spreading. Okay? So that's essentially what we would use, but it just kind of shows you a comparison between zinc strips. Home Depot, not to discredit them, but Home Depot sells zinc strips. The problem with zinc strips is that they're only effective for the first like 4 to 6 feet. Okay? Most roofing systems are about 18 to 20 feet long. So copper works for the first 30 feet. And that's why it costs almost 3 times as much, but it covers 3 times as much and lasts longer. So you gotta kind of like weigh your pros and cons with it. So shingles, not gonna spend a lot of time on this, but if you are seeing a home that had just had their roofing done recently, many people are replacing their roofing systems now with metal roofing. There's a lot of advantages of metal roofing. You know, it's impact resistant, it's an Energy Star rated roof, which means it helps reflect a lot more energy away from the roofing system, a lot radiant heat away from the roofing system. And you don't have to deal with the shingles curling or peeling or anything like that either on there. However, you're gonna see, and this is a metal roof. Over here, when you see light shingles like this particular one is called silver birch, but manufacturers make them in different names. But essentially, when you see very light shingles like that, they're considered Energy Star shingles. So up until 2 years ago, the government had a rebate for it, that if you upgraded to one of those shingles, they gave you 10% off the total investment of the roofing system on there, up to $500, because there's always a catch, right? But they're designed to reflect up to 90% of radiant heat away from the roofing system. So whenever you see a light colored shingle like that, just know that they did it because they wanted to be as energy efficient as possible for the home. So that's very smart to do if you live in if you live in a city, you don't have a lot of trees around you. That's gonna help keep the home a little bit cooler in the summertime on there. It'll also help keep it a little bit cooler in the wintertime too, to help the snow melt evenly on the roofing system. So that will help. We're doing an installation like that tomorrow. And then of course, in the where you live in like the woods and things like that, where you have a lot of tree coverage, may not be the best because you're gonna have a lot more shading on there. So you may not get the same energy efficiency on there. So it just depends on your environment and where you're gonna wanna use it, okay?
The metal shingles, does it make noise when it rains?
You know, that was, so in 2007, 2008, when I first started learning about these metal roofing systems, that was one of the biggest things that they used to say is like a selling advantage for asphalt roofing versus metal roofing, was that metal was really loud. And even we were trained to say that too. And the truth of the matter is that you actually don't really notice. And the reason for that is because of the fact that if you think about it, it goes from the metal, you have your underlayment, you have your plywood, and then you have open air in your attic, and then you have your insulation, which is designed to help dampen noise as well. And then you have your sheetrock, and then you have your room. And then, so very often than not, you're not going to really hear it too much on there. But if it was hail, you'd hear it. But I'm sure you'd hear it also on a regular asphalt roof too.
Hail, dent.
100%. Yeah, it will. But but it's not going to penetrate through it.
Okay.
Right? So these usually have a pretty high gauge. So the gauge is typically going to range between 18 gauge to about 26 gauge, which essentially means like the thickness of the metal on there. So the the lower the number, the thicker it is, I believe. So 19 gauge is supposed to be like really thick on there. And I believe these ones here were, I think 26 gauge. So they're relatively thick, not super thick, but they're relatively thick. But they're designed to be impact resistant. Now with shingles, there's only one other shingle. So this shingle here on the left is an impact resistant shingle. So this shingle on the left was actually designed, it's actually one of the only shingles in the country that was designed for extreme weather. So this is called a Northgate shingle, and I don't want to get too technical with it, but the difference with that shingle compared to a traditional shingle is that it's infused with something called SBS modification, which simply means that it's infused with rubber. So the rubber inside the shingle actually makes it very elastic, so it expands and contracts. So when something hits it, it's more likely to rebound off it and not cause a fracture or dent in the actual shingle itself. Because what happens with a lot of shingles is that when they're hit or impacted by something, they actually fracture or crack, and that leads to a leak. So with the Northgate architectural shingles, they're designed not to do that. So they're a lot stronger. So the manufacturer, Certainty, designed this specifically for areas that have high hail, high winds, high snow, and high heat and cold environments on there. So that's one of the shingles that's rated for this environment on there. So that's a good question. As far as siding goes, again, dealing with the climate and energy efficiency here. Whenever you're replacing siding, building code says that whenever siding is replaced, insulation should be put behind the wall, either in the wall or outside the wall. If you do not do that, that breaks code. And if the building inspector was to be driving around seeing the insulation being installed with no insulation, they could require that to be completely taken off and redone. And then more often than not, most building contractors do not follow that to the T, okay? But the problem is that they weigh their risks because of the fact that there's usually about 500 to 600 installations going on in most towns every single day, and there's only about 4 to 5 building inspectors in each town. So there's not enough of them on there. In Worcester, we work with a lot of the city building inspectors out there, and that's one of the common problems that they talk to us about, is just not having enough people on staff to be able to do the inspections. And so as consequently what happens is that a lot of homeowners don't realize that it's being done wrong, but they don't know any better, you know? And by the time it's replaced, they're usually not gonna remove the entire siding to do the inspection. They might, but they don't typically do that. So with siding, the whole purpose of siding is for a couple things. Obviously, you want to maximize the beauty of the home, but more importantly, you want to maximize the energy efficiency of the home as well too. And because the walls account for about 35% of the energy loss in the home, it's very important that your siding is done well. Now, what happens when your siding is not done well? Moisture builds behind it and it leads to significant rot. We could see over here on the picture on the left here, there is something. So around windows, there's a little piece of trim that goes around there that's called a J channel. The whole purpose of a J channel is so that water doesn't come behind the wall and behind the window, okay? In this particular case here, it didn't have that, it failed, and it led to a slow leak behind the wall, ended up rotting out the entire wall on there, okay? So whenever you're dealing with situations like this here, it gets very, very expensive on there. They ended up adding about $7,000 for work. For a wall like that. You could also look for seal failure in the window as well too. There was seal failure in that window and there as well, okay? Things like this in the siding is gonna typically happen when it's south-facing, when the sun's pounding on the home, okay? So if you're looking at a home that's on a hill or in a cul-de-sac, we see this a lot on cul-de-sacs. Particularly why we see it a lot in cul-de-sacs, because they're new construction and their homes are super energy efficient and their windows are super energy efficient. So most of their windows have low E glass. The low E glass are like mirrors, okay? So what happens is that when the sun's hitting them, they reflect the sun's rays off of it and it reflects it directly on the siding and it actually burns and melts the siding, okay? So this happened to my cousin's house. Her house was built in 2004. And her whole entire community was having problems like this because of the way that the sun was hitting the home, okay? So that's one of the things to look out for. And then the bottom one right here, this happens on the north side of the home, and that's where you're gonna have a lot of bushes and shrubs there. That's an indication that there's moisture building up in that wall and in that siding, okay? So don't ignore that. You gotta figure out whether or not there's moisture behind the wall also on there as well. And you don't wanna use bleach to clean this either, okay? And then of course siding here as well. This is a roofing system. So this is a home that was built in the 90s. And so a lot of those homes are gonna have the clapboard siding or wood siding on it still. And this is a garage here. So what happened in this particular case here is that there was a leak inside the wall because of the fact that we call this a transitional wall, where your roofing system ties into your siding on here, and the step flashing had failed there. So there was a leak in this area right here. And ended up working its way back into the attic space and ended up causing a major leak inside the actual ceiling. Now, if you notice that there, that's mold. So if you see that going on there, it's usually 10 times worse on the other side of that ceiling and wall. And in order to fix that, you have to take that all out, okay? So don't ignore that. But again, it's very important that if you're ever noticing something like this, you got to try to look for the root cause of it. So when you're looking at these new homes that you're considering buying on there, especially if it's been vacant, you want to walk around each room, especially upstairs. You want to walk around each room and around the windows and look for discoloration in the ceilings and walls. What is it, if someone knew that this was going on and they wanted to sell the home, what would they do to prepare the home for sale if they didn't want you to see it? If it smells like fresh paint, you got to wonder why, right? And we see this all the time. So you got to get in there and like just really think about, why did they just paint it? Why did they just replace the roof? What did they know that we don't know? Because you're about to buy and inherit their investment that they don't want anymore. Why? You know, so I try to look into that a little bit more. So in this here, in order for us to solve this problem, we need to solve this problem first, okay? And then of course windows, okay? So with the original photo that I showed you, unfortunately I wasn't able to show you the dramatic effect of the pests and stuff, but we could clearly see that seal failure can be a nuisance because it really takes away from the beauty and elegance of the actual home. It really looks bad. But the biggest problem with it is the condensation that builds up inside that window. That condensation is also building up inside that wall. So don't ignore that. So if you're looking at a home, especially around basements or in children's rooms, you want to make sure that there's no moisture sitting inside of the window sills. And right over here, if this is rotted out like this, there's a potential that there's moisture inside that wall too. This was a house in Boston that the sill had completely rotted out and the moisture was inside that wall too because of the window had failed, okay? So just take a look at that because that's something that you're gonna need to replace within the first few years that you're living in the home. And if you don't do your math right and you have 27 windows in the home, you know, that could be very expensive. You could be looking at between $10,000 to $15,000 investment just for windows. And that's just for a standard window. You know, I used to work for a company that used to sell windows for almost $2,000 a window. You could see why I don't sell there anymore. So it could get very expensive. You know, so just you want to just know what you're sort of getting yourself into. Another thing with windows too is that it's hard to tell in this picture, but there's actually a little gap here as well. And so what happens with vinyl windows is that vinyl windows have a tendency to warp, okay? So if you have the time and you're not in a huge rush, go through that house with vinyl windows and open and close all the windows. I almost guarantee that about 70% of the time that you do that, you're gonna find that most of the windows don't open and close that well. Okay, and you're gonna find at least a few windows in there, bigger windows particularly, that get jammed. So sliding glass doors almost notoriously always get stuck. And that's where you have huge drafts, especially when they go out to the patio on there. So here's an example of one, okay? Sliding glass doors are like the equivalent of having like 4 or 5 windows, okay? So they lead to a lot of energy loss in the home. And they also lead to a lot of leaks in homes too. And so if you have wood around them, the wood has a tendency to rot around the door on there. So that's why it's important that you're constantly maintaining and painting that house. If you're not doing that every 5 to 7 years, it's gonna fail and it's gonna get very expensive very fast on there. So if you look at a new home and you could tell that it was recently painted, great. How many layers of paint did they do? If they only did 1 layer of paint, it's not, they're just doing just an overlay, okay, which isn't really that good. Usually when you paint a home, you want to have at least 2 to 3 coats put on it, on there. So with sliding glass doors, you want to look for discoloration in the flooring. You want to look for discoloration in the walls. That's going to give you an indicator that there's moisture problems in that wall and in that floor, okay? And then how are we doing on time here? I think we're moving right along here. So how do we find a good contractor? So this is sort of like my list. I've interviewed now, Jesus, I don't even know, since 2012. I think we're at about 387 contractors that we've interviewed in the Northeast. And I've worked with contractors nationwide. And I tell you, they're all experts. They all tell you they're the best. They're very good at telling you they're best. But it's really hard to find out who really is the best. So I do a lot of digging and I've gotten pretty good at it. And I'm very fortunate now that I have my manufacturers to kind of back me and help me find their best installers. But this is my checklist that I use that's almost bulletproof for me, that if you use on your own and you go through this process, will help you limit the amount of bad experiences you will ever have in your life. And it'll probably save you tens of thousands of dollars in your life too, okay? The first thing that I look for personally is I do not do business with someone that I don't feel like I can trust. And I also try to do business only with people that communicate in the style that I like to communicate. So I'm a very busy person. I'm always on the go. I can do emails, no problem. I'm extremely responsive. Most contractors don't do emails. They can't stand it, right? So I was like, okay, well, what's a better way to communicate with a contractor? They don't mind texting, okay? But you gotta figure out the way that you like to communicate. If you're someone who only communicates by email, you need to find a consulting company or a construction company that communicates by email. Most of them won't, okay? If you're someone that likes to do everything by phone, that's great, but you wanna have it in one way or shape recorded. So they should have what's called a customer management software where they're able to track the conversations that you're having with you. Because what may happen is that you're gonna call them and you're gonna say, hey, you know what? I really, really like that shingle that you showed me last time, but I wanna get it with the Silver Birch Energy Star shingle. And then they show up on the day of the installation, they show up with a black shingle. And they're like, oh, well, the original contract you sent me was black. Yeah, I know, but I called you to tell you that there was a silver shingle. The number one complaint in construction is poor communication. So you need to make sure that you track these little changes in conversation somehow. So that's why working with a well-established company is so important on there. Also, you want to make sure that you're looking for companies with 5-star reviews. Now, that's not the sole thing. It's not the most important thing. But for me, what I'm looking for is mostly what they're writing. When I read reviews of what contractors are getting, I'm trying to look at whether or not homeowners are saying they're fast and cheap. Or if they're saying they took the time to answer my questions, they are very professional, they showed me samples of the product, and there was no pressure, great experience. What's the difference? If I see someone that's only getting fast and cheap, I probably don't want to do work with him because there's probably something that's going to be wrong. And also, I want to look at whether or not that company's even responding back to those reviews. If they take the time to respond back to their reviews, what does that tell you about that company? They care. And they're also going to remember you because of the fact that they have notes in what? That customer management software. Hey, good customer. If something ever comes up, they have a warranty for you and they're going to take care of it. And guess what? Most of those companies are also going to almost every single time give you a lifetime guarantee. The ones that are not are the ones that, again, brought that black shingle over because they don't have a software. They're doing everything by paper, you know? I give my brother a hard time about this because he's a contractor. He does everything by paper. And I'm like, bro, you got to get cut up. And then, of course, I look for customer referrals. So if they've done a job in an area near me, I just like to drive by. I don't need to bother the homeowner, but I like to drive by and see how it looks like. You know, I'm pretty knowledgeable about home improvement stuff, but now you guys are too. But you can usually tell if something's a little bit off. So you just want to kind of drive by, and if possible, maybe talk to the homeowner about their experience, if possible. And there are many of them, many well-established companies in the community will have no problem sharing their contact list with you. Here's one of the biggest ones, and I should probably move this one up, is certifications. So, and a completely random question, but are any of you guys in a trade that requires a certification in here? Any of you teachers? Okay. I learned recently that in order for you to be a teacher in Massachusetts, you have to have a master's degree, right? And I was thinking about why you need to have a master's degree, and it makes sense. You're educating people and making sure that you're pointing them in the right direction in their future, right? However, in construction, you don't need one. You could literally go to someone's house and put up a roof and not even have any credentials at all. Why is it that they allow someone to work on someone's home with no credentials? And it doesn't make sense to me. And the reality is that when that happens, 9 times out of 10, that homeowner does not have a guarantee. 90% of the time. There's a running joke in the industry, it's called a taillight warranty. Have you ever heard of that before? But the idea is the last time you see the taillights of the truck is your warranty, right? And that's sort of the running joke in the industry. And it's actually true. Most homeowners that have a problem and they call that company, they're nowhere to be found. And it's a hassle trying to get a hold of that company. So as a first-time home buyer, you need to avoid this circumstance because you're taking, in many cases, your initial deposit's gonna be $10, $15, $20, $30,000. That probably took you 5 to 10 years to save. And your first bad experience, that is gone. And that's what happened to my mother. And that's why I press on it, because I see it happen every single day with homeowners that we work with on there. So in order to prevent that from happening, it's important that they carry insurance. Massachusetts has a requirement of minimum insurance. I believe it's $500,000. I ask for at least $1 million to $2 million policy on there for anyone that works with us. Our minimum is $2 million for our contractors. But you want to make sure that they're carrying at least $1 million worth of coverage. The main reason for that, in the event that something was to ever happen on that property, whose property is it? Okay. And who is the employer?
Bank.
Is the bank the employer? Who's the employer of the contractor on site?
Oh, you are.
So if something goes wrong and they don't have sufficient coverage, the homeowner can be liable. And homeowners get sued quite often because of that. If a guy's climbing on a roof, last year there was 346 deaths related to instances where contractors were climbing ladders nationwide. So if that happens on your property, God forbid it does, or someone falls off and breaks their neck and they don't have proper coverage and they need to pay their bills, they might come after your insurance policy. So you need to cover your butts to protect yourselves. And again, I'm giving you extreme, but when you go on the Better Business Bureau and you look at complaints and you look at the industries that are most complained about, roofing is one of the most complained about industries. And construction in general is one of the most complained about industries in the entire world. It's pretty bad, 68%. And then of course, what I look for when I'm looking to determine whether or not I want to work with a company, I like to know what I'm getting into. I like to, if they have a showroom, even better. Go to the showroom, touch everything, feel everything. But you want to understand the materials that they're going to be using on your home to make any repairs or any renovations. And you want to make sure that they're explaining to you the process of how they're going to do it, how they're going to address issues. So when they're doing that for you, they should be able to provide for you a clear explanation on how they're going to resolve each problem. So for instance, that ceiling that we identified that there was a leak, did they get in the attic to identify the root cause of that leak? Because guess what? If they didn't, on the day of the installation, you're going to get this. Oh, sorry, Mr. Customer, we're going to need an additional $3,000 in order for us to replace the wood. We could have figured that out during the initial inspection and let you prepare for it so that you're not in that situation. Now you're in a situation where you're forced to come up with an additional $3,000 that you may have not budgeted. That is a very bad situation in many situations, in many circumstances on there. You also want to make sure that there's a complete inspection report. Now, not all companies have the formality to do a complete inspection report. Sometimes it's as simple as doing a video or photos, providing before and after pictures to provide evidence of what's going on. Because you want to have before and after photos. Before and after photos are very powerful because of the fact that in the event that something was to happen down the road and it was related to the roofing situation and you had that company that provided you a lifetime guarantee and they're no longer in business, but that lifetime guarantee is still good, the manufacturer will still honor it if there's a lifetime guarantee. If there's no lifetime guarantee, you're completely on your own. So what do? You present it to your insurance. They might want evidence, and having before and after photos will help provide that evidence for you. So it's always a benefit to you to have that, okay? And then of course, the last few things here is you want to try to put as little money down as possible on here whenever you're doing any major home improvement projects. So if possible, no money down and you pay upon completion. But if it's a really big project that goes beyond like say $20,000, they're going to probably want at least a third down up front on there. You want to make sure though that before you give any cash up front that you have a legal contract that clearly describes who's going to be doing the work, how they're going to be doing the work, and who's going to be pulling the permits, and make sure that they're not pulling the permit in your name. The moment they pull the permit in your name, you are 100% liable about whether or not they did that job right, the homeowner. And that was one of the things that we ran into last month is that I had a homeowners, I teach also in Worcester, and we had a situation where we had a local contractor give her a quote, and the quote was like $3,000 lower, and we decided to go, she called me and she was like, hey, can you go through this because I'm a little bit confused about their proposal. Turns out that they weren't doing proper flashing, they weren't going to be doing proper water barriers, they weren't going to be addressing ventilation issues, and they were pulling the permit in her name. And there was no guarantee at all on there. So you just got to really understand what it is that you're getting yourself into when you're looking at these contracts and go through them in detail on there. And then, of course, never, ever, 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 ever pay any projects cash. Now, I don't mean by check or credit card. Some people call that cash. It's not cash. Cash, I mean dollar bills, okay? Some contractors will say, yeah, I'll be happy to do this roof repair for you for $2,400, but you have to pay me cash, okay? Don't do that, and the reason for that is because there's no paper trail. So if an issue ever did arise 3 to 4 years down the road and you had to take them to civil court, the judge is going to want to know if there's a paper trail. So you need receipts and you need proof of payment on there as well. So that's why I would prefer to do a check, credit card, or finance if possible to make sure that there's a paper trail, just to protect yourselves, okay? So just the last few things here, and I thank you all for your patience. I know that this is a lot of information on a Wednesday night. I know you guys would much rather be at like a rave or something, so. But this is kind of like what to expect when going through like a remodeling project or a construction project. And so you should have a project manager dedicated to your project, whether it's the original consultant or a foreman. There should be someone assigned from that company that should work you every step of the way and walk you through it. So that if something ever were to come up, which almost every single time there's a construction project, something comes up. Almost every single time something comes up. So what we recommend is that you budget for unexpected costs. Depending on the size of the project, if it's a roofing project that's $10,000 to $15,000, we recommend that you budget for an additional 5 to 10% of the additional cost of the project. Reason for that is for unexpected wood replacement. It's typically the most common thing. Wood replacement and flashing are typically the most common costs that you're going to incur with things like that. Now, when you're doing major remodels like a kitchen or a bathroom, I say budget for like 20 to 30%. Why? We talked about it briefly earlier. Unexpected wiring, unexpected plumbing, right? Unexpected foundation issues, unexpected structural issues, especially if you're knocking out walls, okay? So for those bigger projects, you really want to make sure that you have an expert that's been able to look through the project in detail, create a whole architectural plan for you, and provide recommendations on how to tackle these projects. If you've done these things in the past on your own, that's cool. Go to Home Depot. They have an architect there that can help you design these things, and they can walk you through it. But it's still important that you have an electrician and a plumber and a carpenter do a walkthrough with you before any work begins, because they'll be able to mentally prepare you on what's going to happen. The last thing you want to do is take on a major project like that and then in the middle of it realize that you weren't prepared for these additional expenses and your home equity line's now maxed out and you still have another $25,000 to go and you have no more funding. Guess what? Your project is staying undone for a while until you come up with that additional money. So don't end up in that situation, okay? Last few things on here is you want to make sure that the property stays clean, safe, and organized. This is a really big deal, especially if you have children, if you have animals, because of the fact that some companies will literally just leave the moment it gets dark and there's still debris and nails on the ground. And then all of a sudden you got a flat tire first thing in the morning when you're getting ready to go to work. I got like 2 nails in my tires right now. So you need to, it's very important that you do that on there, okay? And then of course, I always say, write a review of your experience. It goes a long ways. It's kind of like, it's like one of those little things that you do that people remember. So for me, it's like, if you're ever walking into like a store and someone just cuts you off and then shuts the door in front of you and you're like, what the heck? It's kind of like one of those things. It's the difference for me is like when someone actually opens the door and says, no, go ahead, please. And then you're like, thank you. And then you're like, oh, well, thanks. You know, it's like that extra thank you. A lot of people don't do it and they go a long way. And what's really cool too is that most contractors can look that up. So if you've done work with that contractor, they'll actually be able to know whether or not you wrote a review for them, and they're more likely to give you better service in the future. Sounds like it's not fair, but they're human, you know, and they're gonna, if you're the kind of person that treats people well, you're gonna most likely be treated better than other people, you know, because you're a good person. So the last few things I'm gonna share with you here is where to find this information, okay? Cost versus value is one of your best friends. And if you go to their website, you can literally put in your zip code and it'll tell you what the expected investment should be on almost any single project you're looking at nationwide. So if you live in like Florida, Georgia, Texas, or here in New England, It'll give you national averages, so it'll break it down by Worcester, New England, and it'll give you national averages also, just to make sure that your pricing's fair. Okay, so it'll give you a really good cost idea. It'll also give you an idea of what your expected return on investment should be. Now, it's not 100% accurate, right? They're people's opinions, and market conditions do vary from location to location, but it's a good resource, okay? And you could literally put in roofing, siding, windows, doors, patio, basement remodel, addition, and it'll give you information and advice on those things, okay? And these are some additional resources on here too, that if you guys take advantage of these, will save you a ton of time and a ton of money, okay? A lot of the information I've put together here today, I've been researching for years, and it's been really helpful for me, and I know it'll be really helpful for you. This will give you advice on, you know, the home inspection process, 8 reasons to buy a home, seasonal home maintenance checklist. Theirs is really good for the spring, summer, fall. It'll give you like a checklist of what you should do around the home on there. And then, of course, there's also additional information here on how to hire a contractor, cost versus value. But I put this together for you as some helpful resources so that you guys could do your due diligence and do a little bit more research when you're living in your homes on there, okay? But that's really it. I know this was a lot of information. It's a lot of information to take in, so thank you all for your time, and you know, you guys had some really great questions. I do want to take the time to kind of just really briefly just highlight that these are some of our certified partners in the area. So we do work with architects, engineers, and builders alike that are full service. And we've worked with them with our manufacturers just really to make sure that homeowners have a great experience. We've had a lot of success with them. So if you ever do have any friends or family in need of any help, you know, reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to kind of guide you in the right direction and point you in the right direction of whether or not that project should be replaced or just simply just a quick repair would be suffice for your project on there, okay? But overall, you know, I wish you guys the best of luck. Congratulations on completing the certification program, and I wish you guys happy holidays. All right? And this video is going to go viral, right?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Is this on your website, this whole package?
It will be after these next few days, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to, so I'm going to be doing another one, so because this video here is going to be a little bit hard to see because it's a little bit further away. But it'll at least show a general workshop on there. So I will have that on like my YouTube channel. But what I'm going to be doing in the next couple of days is I'm actually going to be updating this presentation to include a bit more information about the winter. And I'm actually going to do a presentation where it's just slides and me talking in the background. So it's easier for people to follow along. So if you have a family or friend in need that, you know, don't really know how to tackle these projects, but you think that this information will be relevant to them, you could just share it with them, and that's no problem at all on there. I'm gonna create a library on my website that they could access it on there. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you.